on this computer. All right. Hi, everybody. Today is Tuesday, September the 26th. This is SIG Testing's weekly meeting. It is being publicly recorded and will be posted to YouTube shortly. On the agenda today, just first off, we've started this nice trend of having sort of a daily stand-up that is available to folks outside of Google, which I think we missed due to a scheduling snafu. So if anybody has any quick announcements, we can go over that. Sort of a follow-up from last week, we had sort of a discussion about on-call practices and escalation procedure, and I believe Jace opted to take that on, and we had a brief breakout session, so I'll hand off to Jace for a little bit to talk about that. I have an update on how things are going with release 1.8. I have some draft of slides about an update that I'm going to try giving to the community meeting tomorrow. When the release, Thursday after the release has gone successfully out the door tomorrow. And Tim will speak a little bit to updates on CNCF conformance stuff. So, first off, stand up. Anybody doing anything super urgent that we need to collaborate on today? All right, I didn't think so. But I will just say the stand-up has been super cool for the times that I've been there. Next up, Jace, you want to talk a little bit about sort of the on-call breakout session and where we are with that?
Sure. Let me paste a document into chat because that's sort of the heart of what we'll be talking about here for a moment. So first of all, thank you for getting the stand-ups going because it has been tremendously helpful. And I'm hoping that during burn down periods that we continue that trend and maybe even when we're not in burn down. But this document that I just shared, I'll share my screen as well, so I'll go through it quickly. Let me find it. This is it. Okay, so essentially I was paired with Ben Elder to go through this, the idea of what does it look like to actually have a policy around response to outages, and how can we set better expectations and visibility with the community so that people have an idea what's going on with the testing status, so they're not just hitting retest all and flooding the poor infrastructure with even more requests. So essentially what we did was came up with an overview of the problem, basically stating that with as much growth as we're having, it's pretty much time for us to proclaim status on test infra and testing issues so people have some awareness of that. And outcomes, essentially, we want to provide real-time messaging to the community. We want to create a go-to URL so people always know that status.cates.io or whatever we pick is the place to go to know if your tests are failing because of something you've done or because it's an underlying problem. Increase visibility into the testing infrastructure so we can garner more community support, and also help spread the responsibility and maintenance of the support burden in the future. So ideally, as people become more familiar with this testing infrastructure and we make it more fungible across cloud environments, this will provide an opportunity for more and more people to become involved and also go on-call rotation. Because it is simply not fair that Google has to bear the burden of this on their own. So let's, many hands make light work. So guiding principles of this particular effort to do this were essentially we want to make this easy for the person on call. So part of what we're doing is to add an additional layer of support, which is a communications role that helps the person doing the tech work not have to also be the person that's updating the status page or communicating with the community in terms of questions. I've seen this model work extremely well. It also provides the person who's doing the shadow work for communication visibility in the underlying processes and triage process so that in the future they may be more equipped to be a primary on call. We want to do this as minimally as possible. There's some debate about whether having a pair is minimal or not. I'd invite anybody with opinions on that to weigh in. We want to hone this process over time, so we'll do an initial cut of this, but ideally over time we'll expand hours, we'll expand capabilities in terms of integration with the community and with chatbots and whatever else we can do to make this easy and lightweight. So there's a narrative here, this process in a nutshell. Basically, it goes through what it would look like to have this process fully operational. And there's some things that need to be determined, like what is the threshold for when an incident is actually declared, what is the resolution time, what is the cadence for communications back to the community. All those things we'll figure out, but at the sort of base structure of all this is in place. So I welcome comments and would love to get more feedback on this. But ideally, this will get drafted up into a proposal and put on the community page and hopefully ratified. And I'd love to see that happen in the next few weeks. Any questions?
I'm not opposed to anything you said. I'm just kind of slightly confused by, wouldn't this be a responsibility of the steering committee to ratify and approve this one?
Much like SIG level things, this is a strategy around a SIG implementation, not an SLA for the project as a whole. So okay. This is just codifying existing practices, because right now the test on call is already established. But what they don't have is a way for the community to get a good visibility into their existing processes. So this is really providing that.
Thanks. That helps clarify it a lot.
Good.
For some teams, they find that they do a secondary primary rotation where the secondary shadows for 1 week and does comms perhaps. The next week they're primary generally, and that way when you do the shift change, you already have context into what was going on. It sounds like you're thinking more about just having like a comms person that's not going to be primary.
So yeah, and the reason that your approach is what I would like to see us move into. But unfortunately, that by nature of the access and privileges required to do that primary role means it would have to be somebody from Google. So I would welcome that setup that you described because I think it's ideal. But that puts another large burden on your organization, and I don't think that's fair. So what I'm trying to do is come up with something we can do, even if it's trivial, just to try and help out and get some community support. Because again, I feel that there's a serious inequity in terms of how much work it is for all of you to do that.
It also might be useful to be able to show that we have people that are ready to be doing that, switching
yes.
secondary and primary, and that we need, the rest of the community to push to get those community projects set up so that they can actually start becoming primaries.
Yep. And just FYI too, I'm still pounding the pavement to get Microsoft to pony up some Azure stuff to be able to do some of this stuff. So it's just it's a process, and I feel like this is a great place to start so we can start getting those practices in place. And then yeah, eventually I would love to have primary, secondary, because just sitting next to somebody or virtually or otherwise and watching what they do is incredibly informative. Any other questions, concerns?
That's fantastic progress. At some point, I'm assuming we'd like to have this document linked from sort of a GitHub issue or something to get some more attention. Where do we feel like we're at on that?
I was going to convert it to Markdown and put it as an issue in the community repo. And once it gets merged, then that's ostensibly an approval. So once that's up as a PR, I will shove that far and wide.
I would get some people to comment more on the specifics, like how quickly we want to escalate, and some more discussion of how we want to actually do the status page. I've been kind of informally discussing with some people, but we haven't really reached a complete consensus on how that should be done. It seems like we're trending towards just something static hosted somewhere in like a JSON blob with the data and a link to a GitHub search for the issues, but we should actually write that up somewhere.
Yeah, I think we do the high level policy and then we talk about how to implement it, because there are definitely some nuances about how we do it, and I don't want it to be yet another maintenance burden to actually keep the thing up. So yeah, let's try and make it as easy as possible.
My gut tells me some of us will have more bandwidth next week after a release is cut perfectly on time as scheduled. To have that sort of discussion. Okay, on that note, I'll share my screen real quick and talk about how we're doing with 1.8. Let's see, that's the test here. Okay, so just a little note that I opted to turn into a human dashboard and really try and go through all of the tests that we're looking at, because we've once again followed this great policy of cutting bits without actually making sure all the tests are green. And so we as the release team started to get confused about which tests actually matter and what's the authoritative list of tests that we're going to check. So I wanted to just be a simple human and come up with a checklist of these are all the tests that have to be green. These are the tests that are failing and we know that they're failing and we're going to ignore it. These are the tests we don't care so much about because they take forever, so on and so forth. As I went through this exercise, so first off, just some annotations. Release 1.8 blocking, our intent is all of these tests should basically pass 3 times in a row before we cut a release. That's mostly true, except for a couple known flaky suites. This one and the kubelet suite seems to have a bunch of flakes that just are spread around enough that it's going to be difficult to get those to pass 3 times in a row. And the serial suites take a long time, so if we really wanted to wait for 3 consecutive passes, it'd be 15 hours. Many of the upgrade tests have a lot of known failures that we're just like ignoring. So even though they fail and are red, we're still going to be happy with those. Many of them take so long that we're not going to wait the full 3 runs. Like some of them take 12 hours, so it would take a day and a half to get 3 consecutive passes, and that's assuming they don't flake. And then finally, we've had some issues with scalability and API latency with large clusters, and so we're looking at 2 tests that are in the master blocking dashboard. We're not blocking on them, we're just using them as information to see whether or not this is whether this issue has been solved. You can notice like a lot of what I'm doing in the issue here is crossing out test cases once we notice they're not a problem, and I'm attempting to link to issues and pull requests to just sort of give people a heads up on like what the status of this is. If we have an explanation, if we're explaining in a way as humans that this failure is acceptable, what is that explanation? Who did it? Why? So that sort of tribal knowledge I feel like has been lost in the past. Calling out the flaky tests and stuff, it turns out that a lot of the information about which things are failing and which things are flaky pretty much matches the dashboard here. The summary tabs in testgrid are very, very useful. I just think that as a human, there's some annotation stuff that doesn't seem to be intuitively obvious here. Like if I want to mark a suite as failing for a known reason, I can't quite do that, although maybe I could like have a description or something that might change that. And being able to quickly say that we ran into a number of tests that would fail, like tests we decided to skip for the 1.6 to 1.8 upgrade because of changing APIs, but they were still valid for the 1.7 to 1.8 upgrade. So just figuring out the right set of regexes or which code base to modify to skip those tests would be helpful. I think maybe we have the tools for that stuff in place, but it's just sort of stopped us from really adhering to that dumb, stupid, simple, only cut the builds when all of the boxes are green. I pine for that day. It'll be soon, I'm sure. But yeah, I just wanted to say, like, I recognize as a human, I'm duplicating some of the effort and the tools we have available to us. Oh, there was one other one I wanted to call out, triage. The triage board has been tremendously helpful. We found that one of the scheduler predicates test was failing. We're like, that's weird. We wonder if it's limited to the downgrade tests. And so I was able to just take the text and paste it into triage and see that actually it's hitting a number of jobs, not just the downgrade test. In fact, it might just be all of the serial jobs are affected and the downgrade job happens to be one of those serial things. So I just wanted to give a shout out to how awesome the tools are in that regard. Okay, any questions?
I just wanted to note, for testgrid in particular, we have an internal feature where you can add annotations for things like this test is known broken, this suite is known broken. It's not on the external side yet. I think we're looking at doing that, but like people want to be able to have alerts on the different tabs in different ways. So
yeah,
we don't know. Okay, sorry, I thought you were done.
We don't currently have great support for a human looking at something and saying, all other humans, this is what's going on. It's all ad hoc GitHub issue stuff right now, which is ideal.
Right.
At the end of this cycle, it would be really nice to have a post-mortem on testing that basically summarize these are the known biggest offenders. I know that Eric did a great job for a while where he was doing summaries. Those were fantastic. And we actually did a lot of work in 1.8 to push certain end-to-end tests to be out of the mainline suite or to prevent them from being critical blockers that they were in the past. So if we have a synopsis as we start to make test modifications in 1.9 again of known areas of problem areas, I would be happy to address those.
Okay, well, so it's almost like you knew one of the things I was going to present, and I really want to hammer to the community when I present it. And also, I think like topics like this would be great for the retrospective. I agree, the test grid stuff, I'm sure there's some internal things. So I'm going to just try and I'm trying to consume the tools as a human. Feedback I have, I'll provide to the retro, and we can pull into SIG testing planning. So
I would just like a canonical issue that we create and we own, and I'd be happy to execute on and put resources to execute on to fix the end-to-end tests that were the biggest troublemakers. And we did that last cycle, and we'll do it again this cycle. So if we have known knowns, I'm happy to put resources on it.
Okay. So I'm going to flip through these here. I'm not going to try and present everything, but I'm going to try and squash some of this down to like 10 to 15 minutes for community. Hopefully y'all can see a screen that says SIG testing update. Okay, cool. So like I said, I wrote this September 14th. Much of it might be out of date right now. Please call me on that. Our Slack channel is freaking amazing. This is what life in SIG testing is like kind of on a daily basis. Please come hang out. So I'll actually populate the agenda. It's just going to be a walk through a bunch of random things that we've done this past quarter to help enable productivity. For those of you who lurk on the contributor experience mailing list probably saw this email from Eric Feta. I plan on incorporating the actual people he calls out, giving credit for all this stuff, because everybody here has done some amazing work. So Voskis is this awesome thing. Basically allows you to, at the moment we're using it to lease GCP projects for a given job instead of having to maintain a single GCP project per job that we're running. Adoption of this sort of kicked up pretty quickly over the summer. We had about 170 or so projects donated to a pool of projects that we could lease. And as of the last time I checked in September, we're up to about 420 odd things. Right now, we're just using it to lease GCP projects, but generically, it's supposed to allow you to lease resources from a pool, check them out, and then clean them up before putting them back in that pool. So you can imagine how this could be used for other resources, and we're thinking about how this could be extended to AWS and other pieces of infrastructure. One of the things I liked about it out of the box was that there's sort of a dashboard where you can pretty quickly see how it's doing and generally whether or not it's healthy. If I zoom out a little bit, there have been some times where Voskis has had some issues. So generally, if I start to see a bunch of issues in PRs where like a cluster has trouble coming up, if I come here and notice that the graphs are sort of spiking up or down in an odd direction, that's a sign that something is off. This was something we had a presentation on in SIG testing a little while ago. Links, slides, design doc, all that good stuff. Kubernetes, super awesome. An example of Kubernetes at work. I'll just sort of walk through some of the new features here. So, hey, gee, there's a test failure. If I want to know more about how that test failure happened, I can click this link here to see standard out and standard error from the test itself instead of having to click through to the raw build log and sift through all sorts of stuff. I can also tell that in this particular test run, 333 tests passed, 2 failed. If I want to know which tests passed specifically, I can go down to the folded lists here and see which tests were skipped and passed. I think that's all the shiny new awesome Kubernetes stuff. You probably also know I can look at recent runs of just this particular job, which is sort of a lo-fi way of just getting a feel for the stability or flakiness of this job. And there's been some awesome work that folks here know a lot more about, where Kubernetes has been tuned to handle non-Kubernetes repos a little bit better and support JUnit results that are arbitrarily nested, which although the Kubernetes project doesn't do, OpenShift and others outside of the Kubernetes community do. So we're working on making this more reusable. If I have time, I'm actually going to try and link to some of this stuff. Cole created a robot called Issue Creator, which is basically replacing 3 what are called mungers. Mungers are things that sweep through GitHub and do stuff. So we basically removed a couple mungers, and this is the thing that's responsible, for example, creating issues for clusters of failures from that triage dashboard I linked a little while ago. Kubetest is basically the canonical way of running Kubernetes tests. It's the thing that lets you stand up a cluster, test the cluster, tear the cluster down, get results from it. For those of you who are familiar with hack e2e.go, this is sort of the replacement for that. It's coded in a way where you can have different deployers for different cloud providers. So we have a COPS deployer, we have a GKE deployer. We've also recently added support for triggering the node E2E tests through this. And there's also been support added to stand up multiple Kubernetes Anywhere clusters in an effort to use this as the canonical way of doing end-to-end testing for federation. Thing to sync labels, skipping past that. Planter is a really cool thing where eventually we're going to live in this brave new world where Bazel is used to build everything for Kubernetes. It will be the thing that manages all of the dependencies instead of having to bake all the dependencies inside of a Docker container. But right now we're still at a place where Bazel isn't the friendliest experience in a cross-platform manner. So for folks like myself who are running on Mac, I can use this Docker image to use Bazel inside of that. And it's been actively tested on using Bazel to test and run the Kubernetes repo and Kubernetes test infra code base. We did some awesome stuff with metrics. Got to thank Cole for this. He basically went through and recomputed how we look at flakiness on a per commit basis and a per job basis. And so one of the things I really want to draw your attention to is this table here, which shows the flakiest PR jobs over the past week. And so I can tell right now that the E2E GCE at CD3 job is the flakiest job, and the test in it that flaked the most is job should run a job to completion something or other, but oh, cool, look, SIG apps is in the test name. So right now, if I want to be the most helpful developer and fix the flakiest test in the flakiest job, I would want to go start looking at this particular SIG apps test. If I wanted to work on the second flakiest test in the most flakiest job, I'd probably want to take a look at this kubectl client test case. This is updated regularly, I believe, on an hourly interval. And so we're hoping to use this to more effectively identify which pre-submit jobs are most impacting us from getting code into master.
Can you paste the link to that in the chat window, please, real quick?
Sure.
It's actually updated daily.
Oh, daily. Okay. Thank you. See, this is why I need to dry run in front of y'all. I'll post it in the chat window when I figure out how to use chat in just a second here. Boom. Okay. So this is pretty cool. You can also sort of see that right now, as of today or recently, stats don't look quite right here unless our jobs are really that awesome. But for example, a single commit has a 12.3% chance of hitting a random job failure that has nothing to do with that commit, and it has a 2.6% chance of any single job flaking.
We have a slight delay in the BigQuery metrics right now. That should resolve itself by the end of today.
Okay. Munge GitHub. We are deprecating Munge GitHub. No more Munge GitHub. Only prow, please. Oh, all right. We are still working a little bit on making sure that it's operationally friendly, since it is the basis of our submit queue right now. So we've sort of expanded its ability to export metrics. We recently split the mungers, well, not that recently, I guess back at the beginning of the month, we split the mungers up. So there's one that's responsible for running just the submit queue, and another one that's responsible for running like the approved handler and the release node thing, and all the other things that we're looking to eventually replace and move out of Munge GitHub if we at all can. But this is sort of the dashboard that we can use to make sure, for example, our GitHub API token usage is okay. You can see sort of this is what it looks like when you come out of code freeze. The submit queue really churns pretty heavily for a while, and we've managed to get through about 200 PRs or so over the weekend. Let's see. Lots of awesome stuff happening in Prow. We've added a ton of Prow plugins. We for example, we replaced the size munger with the size plugin. You can /lint on any of your pull requests that have Go code, and it'll automatically comment with Go lint comments on the specific lines of code that are failing lint checks. You can /hold on a pull request, and the bot will automatically apply a do not merge label. You can also just automatically trigger this if you'd like with work in progress thing. That shrub plugin's got to go away. I want to make sure that's not documented. And the Slack, we've also started to turn on Slack events. The one that happened when I wrote this was that we start pinging Slack whenever somebody manually merges a commit. So hopefully Lava Lamp was the build cop or had a really good reason to do this. But if it looks strange and out of the ordinary, now we know who to go talk to, because ideally everything is getting merged just by the bot. Some other cool stuff. Deck has a nice log URI that's pretty easy to guess and is super discoverable. We're getting to the point where you can stream logs from Deck. I think that's actually something I want to remove because we're working more on it from a 1.9 basis. You don't have to hardcode bot names anymore when you're launching prow. And yeah, just all sorts of stuff. I'm running way past time here, but I would like to clean this up in terms of, and prow is ready for you to use too, because we actually have clean docs, clean plugins. It's basically common sense. I want to thank OpenShift, and I want to thank Istio for really hammering at this and ironing out some of the bugs that were sort of assumptions about Kubernetes and Kubernetes only as a project that needed this. It's become much more lightweight. The architectural boundaries seem to be working out pretty well, and it's just become a much better experience. And then the test grid thing, I think most of the community knows about this now. There's this pre-submit dashboard that I'm sort of looking at instead of Kubernetes now to see whether or not things are going okay. And they are for the most part. But this is how I noticed that the COPS AWS job wasn't working when I turned it on this morning. It's like, oh, look, it was working here and failing here. And oh, look, it looks like that bottom box there is the thing that changed. And so it turned out it was a test info change. Good troubleshooting tool. And the summary tab is a really great, just like quick glance at, are all of the pre-submits okay, without me having to look across a ton of different pull requests. And if I'm tired of looking at that in table form, I can also look at it in little box form, and I can see that, hey, it's mostly green. That's cool. Let's see, triage is cool. I probably don't have enough data to see the thing anymore. Oh, it's there occasionally. That's nice. Triage is awesome. Who owns Conformance? We've had this question come up a little bit. I lurk around in the CNCF Conformance working group, and the idea is that SIG architecture owns Conformance because Conformance defines what a Kubernetes is. It's going to be used to define what a certified Kubernetes is. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Tim St. Clair to talk about CNCF Conformance and Kubernetes certification. I've also eaten up time, but hopefully that worked for you guys.
Should I table it now, or should we go on for the CNCF Conformance stuff?
I've got time if everybody else does.
I won't keep it long. I'll just give it TLDR. So the CNCF Conformance group is moving ahead with getting a certification process in place around the current conformance tests. NEC had actually done a very good job doing a detection of API coverage of the conformance area of what APIs are being covered, what APIs are not being covered. And believe it or not, we actually have really low API coverage, a lot lower. Yeah, exactly, shocker. So what you'll probably see in the coming months ahead is a bunch of churn on the actual tests themselves, right? We'll try to manage the churn in a meaningful way and make sure that we do it in a slow and mindful and judicious manner. But I would highly suspect that the end-to-end test suite will be beefed up for the most part. They have more and more and more tests added to them. But we should also be doing it in a mindful manner because there's a bunch of known gotchas that have existed in the test suite for a long time, such as waiting on hard variables or hard timing dependencies, all kinds of other issues. So that's the brief synopsis. I'll pause for questions real quick, if there's any.
I think I saw somebody post a link to like a pull request or a Google spreadsheet or something of of what those API coverage numbers are, if he can post a link to that again in the Slack channel or
Yeah, it was in chat. I'll go back and I talked with the guy from NEC. It was in chat, and I'll post a link to it in the notes.
That'd be great. Yeah, because it was like 20% or something. It was.
Yeah, it's really super low. And there's also a bunch of information with regards to the CNCF group wanting to put metadata inside of the test so that it's humans readable, because a lot of the end-to-end tests are kind of like job does stuff, SIG group, blah. It's hard to decipher unless you actually have written the test or go and grok through the code. So they're putting some jiggery in place to annotate the tests and have another tool which will be able to rip through that annotation, give a human readable, parsable thing about what the test does and why it does what it does.
Was there also going to be presented like the output of these things? Like there was going to be, I think Clayton was saying, some summary page with different projects that were posting their own conformance output?
I don't exactly know what that question is. Can you try rephrasing that?
Is there more information about that, basically? Because
there's a PR, and I can link the PR. And I actually was in the chat channel, so I cross-linked and CC'd the group. So if you're in SIG testing, there is a SIG testing mentioned this PR, which is linked above.
Cool, thanks.
That issue outlines the metadata format that they want to use. So if you see stuff, please at the SIG. That bot's really helpful for notifying other folks in the SIG. I don't know who turned that on by default, but I likes it.
You're one of the few.
I know other people hate it, but I like it actually.
Tim, actually, I'm the guy who presented today about the format of the document. I did talk about this last week here in SIG testing, so I can do it next week.
Sure, that'd be great. Let's get you on the agenda.
Srinivas.
Okay. I apologize for us running long. This is beginning to make me think whether we want to schedule this meeting for a longer time. But I'd rather not think of that in the burn down week right now. But I'll put it on the agenda for us to discuss next week. If anybody has any feedback on things I wildly misstated, or focused too much on during that brief walk through those slides, please ping me. Like I said, assuming the release goes well tomorrow, I'm going to try and spend some time polishing those up and walking through some actual examples of that, like /hold and work in progress functionality and some of the things that Eric suggested folks try out. I might be tempting the demo gods by doing that right in the middle of high traffic week, but seems like show and tell always goes over well. So yeah, I think that's all I have. Anything else from anybody? Going once, going twice. All right. Happy Tuesday, everybody. Thanks for your time.